Sigmund Freud, who was born in 1856 and died in 1939, was a practicing psychotherapist in Vienna, the capital of Austro-Hungarian Empire, and one of the most sophisticated cities in the world at the time. Despite its sophistication and wealth, there were a lot of people with mental issues. But why would such an affluent city have so many people suffering from psychological problems? Materially, people were well off and they had a few worries regarding survival necessities like food and shelter. There had to be something deeper than just material needs we humans crave. With science diminishing religious credibility, people had lost faith in God and church. Now each person had the responsibility to come up with a solid meaning for their lives. It's easier said than done. So Freud realized that there has to be something deeper than we are consciously aware of. He took the task of understanding what lies behind the conscious mind. Just like his predecessors, he took a structuralist approach to the consciousness and came up with a three-level structure: the conscious, the preconscious, and the unconscious. He concluded the unconscious was the deeper well and the source of water in some of our thoughts and experiences. In other words, it's the hidden unconscious beast that determines some of what we think and do. In philosophy, Schopenhauer called it the blind will. I should also point out that both Schopenhauer and Freud were influenced by Hindu philosophy, more specifically the concept of Maya, which is very complex, but simply put, it means that the world we believe in is nothing but an illusion or a mask we put on as we go through the cycle of reincarnation. Atman or Brahman, on the other hand, is the unchanging reality or the true self, which can only be understood through vigorous meditation and conscious understanding. In Hinduism, Maya is the perceived reality. Atman or Brahman is the true reality, which is also the conscious reality. Schopenhauer called the true reality will, and the perception of this will as representation. In other words, we know the reality is often an illusion and the truth lies somewhere deeper, only revealed to us through active digging, i.e. meditation or being conscious in the present. Freud, as a clinician, came across patients who suffered from hysteria. He quickly learned that when patients were asked to describe their fantasies or hallucinations, the mere act of expressing those thoughts alleviated them from the illness. He concluded that many mental illnesses such as anxiety, phobias, hysteria, paranoia were caused by a bad experience in the past that were stored in the unconscious. Instead of forgetting those traumas, the patients must have kept them somewhere in their unconscious memory. In other words, our experiences do not go away but stay with us, often hidden from our conscious mind. It was not external forces such as God or destiny that drove the human mind to madness, but it was all internal. It was here that Freud understood the power as well as the scope of unconscious mind in our conscious life. The conscious mind is just a tiny part of our psyche. There's a whole new world that sits beneath the conscious mind and makes some of our decisions and determines some of our experiences. Just like an iceberg, consciousness is just the tip and always at the mercy of what's hidden. However, it's a somewhat dynamic process between conscious, preconscious, and unconscious. Just like an iceberg that floats, it reveals different parts at different times. While science and technology were making the lives of Europeans more comfortable and predictable, the unconscious mind was the source of all the chaos that a person may experience. In other words, no matter how orderly and safe the outside world is, the unconscious mind is the main source of our psychological problems, often caused by things that happened to us long time ago in our past, in some cases in our ancestral past. The unconscious is also the place where our deepest animalistic urges reside. For example, our instinctive and often unlimited desire for food and sex. As Schopenhauer said, quote, "Life swings like a pendulum backward and forward between pain and boredom." In the unconscious mind, according to Freud, there is no freedom of expression, but a lot of repressed memories and suppressed emotions. I should also point out that this is modern condition because in the olden days, people confessed their inner turmoils, guilt, or suppressed memories during a church confession, or people were much closer to their families and communities so they could confide in those around them. But in big cities like Vienna, where more people were living closer, the emotional distance was much wider. It was far more difficult to confide to anyone. This has not changed. Today, most people live in big cities, yet we feel lonelier than ever. While these conflicts occur down below, on the conscious level, it causes us a lot of pain, suffering, and even grave mental illnesses because they find no venue to vent out. It's like living in a flat and you're surrounded by noisy neighbors who constantly fight and make noise, and there's no escape. At some point, you lose it and you go back on their doors. Our unconscious runs a titanic battle between opposing forces, your wants hitting brick walls, your urges unanswered, which can cause turmoil. Of course, our rational conscious mind tries to tame the beast, but we are not always successful. When the rational conscious mind gets overwhelmed, we experience mental problems. So, how to cope with the problems of the unconscious mind? Freud offered a really unique treatment. It was so simple that it became revolutionary. He didn't invent the wheel. He simply copied a century-old method. For hundreds of years, people went to church to confess their sins. The mere act of talking was enough to alleviate them from the pain of guilt or trauma they were holding inside. The mere act of expression unburdened them from their emotional turmoil. Freud did the same. He opened the church. No, he asked his patients to relax on a comfy chair and talk, which became known as psychotherapy or simply the talking cure. Today, millions of people, mostly in wealthy countries, get their treatment from their therapists. In poor countries, people either cannot afford or perhaps a more reasonable explanation is that life on the outside is harder than the inside. So when you are survival mode, your mind is focused on living another day. Your mind has less time to create problems for you internally. But when we have plenty of food and live comfortable life, the fight moves inside our psyche. Freud noticed that civilization was one of the leading causes of more mental illnesses as it limited individual freedom as an aggressive animal. In the wild, mental illness is perhaps not on your priority list as you battle elements and wild animals. This became the basis of Michel Foucault's philosophy that madness and civilization go hand in hand. I should also mention that the talking cure was as much about letting it out, but also it was about someone listening to you. Most of us live lonely lives in big cities, so having someone who listens to you, you alone, without you shouting, is incredibly powerful. So your therapist is doing the job of your partner, parents, friends, or colleagues who don't listen to you. So therapy is as much about letting things out as it is about having someone who can lend you their time and listening ears. Of course, in modern time, you have to pay for that service. Freud's proofs. Freud's theory of the unconscious sounds neat, but what evidence did he show that we truly have an unconscious mind? He offered 4 pieces of evidence. If volcanoes and hot springs are evidence of molten rock beneath the Earth's crust, then there ought to be some evidence for the unconscious mind too. Freud's first evidence of the unconscious mind was mental illnesses experienced by his patients. They were physically healthy, so why should they suffer from these unknown psychological problems? He listened to them describe their mental state and their childhood memories. In other words, they were experiencing hysteria or hallucinations, often very randomly. This proved to Freud that there must be an underlying unconscious. Freud's second piece of evidence of the unconscious mind was dreams. We all dream. It's universal among all humans, young, old, men, women, across all cultures. For Freud, dreams are how our unconscious mind is communicating to us about our deeper urges and wishes, often repressed wishes from childhood. Freud's third piece of evidence is our verbal mistakes. He argued that our repressed wishes also come to us through simple verbal mistakes, which we know today as Freudian slip, which is another way to understand the unconscious. Our conscious mind fights to keep certain things at bay, but from time to time, we involuntarily give out what we really desire. For example, instead of saying, I like your books, you might say, I like your boobs, if you're attracted to the woman. I've done it. Finally, Freud also studied expression in general. For example, a lot of novelists write fictional tales, but often don't even sell or don't even show them to anyone. Freud called this an act of catharsis. You express simply because you cannot bring yourself to tell people how you feel. In other words, you're letting out your suppressed emotions in stories. Storytelling or writing is so powerful as a method of catharsis that sometimes it's used to treat mentally ill patients, as it allows them to let it out. Catharsis also happens when you read a book or watch a movie, as you feel a release when the characters you relate to in the story gets what he or she wants. So novelists and storytellers act as our therapists, as they allow us to express what we feel inside but cannot express. Either we don't have the words for it or feel socially restricted. Today, online comments is one way of such release. Freud's childhood. For Freud, childhood memories were the most powerful ones sitting in the unconscious. Why? As we grow up, we have to leave our childish behaviors, feelings, memories behind. But we cannot really leave them behind. Instead, we leave them trapped inside us. We suppress them. A great example is the American novel The Catcher in the Rye by J.D. Salinger, about an angry young man who refuses to grow up because he sees grown-ups acting fake. Children are very honest, but as they grow up, they are expected to be nice and polite, which means often being fake. So part of this facade of niceness is suppressed expressions, which means most of social situations you cannot be truly yourself. Another element of modern life is the value of predictability. From trains to work hours, everything is meant to be predictable like a machine. Yet the unconscious is often volatile, chaotic, and restless. Our conscious mind has to reconcile the inner turmoil with the predictable outside world. It's like taming a wild beast to behave in a world run like a factory. This struggle takes a huge mental toll as our conscious and rational mind tries to calm or suppress our unconscious, a pool of urges and chaos. Hence, more and more people break down under the weight of modern demand to keep a tap on their emotions. For millions of years, we have evolved animals that roam the wild and now live in urban boxes. While most of us can adapt to this life, some cannot. To sum up, Sigmund Freud drew on philosophers such as Schopenhauer, Nietzsche, and other psychologists, as well as Hindu philosophy, to understand that beneath the rational conscious mind lies a much powerful unconscious. He observed patients suffering from hysteria and other mental illnesses and allowed his patients to talk about their deep desires and fantasies. To understand the unconscious, he also studied dreams as well as slips of the tongue to reveal the hidden urges we suppress in our unconscious. While Freud understood the power of society and civilization on the individual, he mainly focused on the individual psychology, his or her own unconscious, his or her own suppressed memories, his or her own suppressed emotions, his or her own childhood. As a result, he neglected the group, society, or the collective side of our consciousness. Here comes another giant of psychoanalysis, Carl Jung, who built on Freud's individual-centered psychology with a more collectivistic psychology.